By the way, the polls have not closed in California, so you can still vote in all these districts, including California's 46, where Mike Ortega is running, and he joins us now. Mike, how are you, brother?
I'm doing great. So happy to be here with you all tonight. How are you?
Fantastic. So, Mike, you've been on before. You're a strong progressive running this race. You got DSA Orange County, Senator Nina Turner, Progressive Democrats of America, Rebellion PAC, all these folks backing you. So you're running against an incumbent, Lou Correa. So tell us what's wrong with the incumbent.
Everything is wrong with the incumbent. Everything is wrong with him. He is a representative of all the problems that we see across the corporate establishment, both in the Democratic and Republican parties. He's someone beholden to his donors, who are largely the pharmaceutical industries, the banking industry, big oil. And while he smiles in the face of his constituents here, in the back rooms, he's wheeling and dealing, opposed to universal health care, opposed to a Green New Deal, and opposed to any meaningful change that might actually impact the betterment of the lives of the working people that live here in this district.
So I'm curious how the campaign's gone. So obviously it's gonna get decided tonight. And by the way, it's not necessarily over tonight because both Mike and the incumbent could go on to the general election. So we'll see how it turns out in that regard. But he was one of the 5 Democrats that was against lowering pharmaceutical drug costs in Build Back Better. So I guess you got to give him points for being courageous in saying, yeah, no, I'm with the Republicans. I want higher drug prices. So that is an interesting choice that he made. Has the press beaten him up over that, going, what kind of a no good Democrat screws over Biden and his agenda and is for higher drug prices?
Of course not. No, they've been playing cover for him, and so has the local Democratic Party. The local Democratic Party supports Medicare for all, supports lowering prescription drug prices, supports the Biden agenda and Build Back Better, but went ahead and chose to support and endorse this incumbent who everyone knows has been on the record opposed to allowing Medicare to lower prescription drug prices, opposed to Medicare for all, and makes no secret about supporting our job creators, right? And that's Republican code language for big businesses and Wall Street. And he defends this to this day. I think my campaign manager actually ran into him at the post office the other day. And my campaign manager ran him off asking if he supported a public option. Because they don't, because he knows who butters the bread, right? And if you look up his donations, you'll see Big Pharma and him, old buddies.
Yeah, no, look, if you can't even pretend to be in favor of the public option, are you really on the left? No, you're definitely not on the left, right? I loathe the way that local press like LA Times covers for corporate Democrats and under penalty of law will not tell you what incumbent Democrats are actually for, right? And so that makes it so much harder for people like Mike to be able to run a real campaign where you go, oh, it turns out I have 2 choices. So, but Mike, it's an interesting district that you're in. So if you advance tonight and it's you versus Correa one-on-one after the primary tonight, because obviously, for those of you who don't know, in California, it could be 2 Democrats, it could be 2 Republicans. But in a district like yours, 2 Democrats is very, very plausible. How would you go about knocking him off in the general?
Yeah, so here's the reality with working class communities, not just here locally, but across the country, is they've lost faith in the institutions. Tonight and this election season, we've seen record low turnouts. Low turnouts that we haven't seen in several cycles. And that's because people are jaded and not trusting of the political establishment. And that's who Lou Correa represents. And that's who many of these corporate Democrats represent. He's been an elected official for 25 going on 30 years. He is a part of the problem that exists in America. So as we proceed into the general, a lot of our catchphrases in the progressive world, they're not necessarily gonna be universal. But what will be universal and what we will be able to speak to is we need independent, not bought off politicians. Our campaign doesn't take the corporate money hand over fist the way that Lou Correa does. And so if Democrat or Republican want honesty in their government, want someone that's actually gonna fight for people and not for the corporations, then they need to vote for me. And that's part of the appeal that we have to make with folks that vote Republican on a regular basis. It's because they're disenfranchised, they're disillusioned with the lies that the corporate Democrats give. And we gotta give them credence for that because the Democrats don't help themselves. But if we're actually someone that puts their money where their mouth is, right? And that actually is out here in the fight, not taking the money and speaking the truth, we can win a lot of support. And so far in our canvassing efforts, I've gotten really great response from Republicans. They don't agree with me on all my politics, but what they do appreciate is that I'm opposed to the Citizens United decision and that I'm opposed to the current structure of campaign finance, and that I believe that government needs to work for people, for working families, and not the wealthy billionaires.
Mike, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the context that you're running in. Like we're more than a year into the Democrats controlling, other than the Supreme Court, basically everything federally. And they've had a lot of difficulty, if we assume that they actually wanted to accomplish anything, they've had difficulty in accomplishing much of anything. Along the way, the media has mostly covered for them, implying that if Biden is failing, it's either purely because of Manchin and Sinema or because he listened to too many leftists. And so this feels like an environment to me where people would be calling out for not just Democrats, but better Democrats, since the ones that are in power aren't really accomplishing anything. But like I said, the media is largely covering for the Democratic Party. So when you've been talking with people, do you feel among Democrats a dissatisfaction with what Biden and congressional Democrats have been able to accomplish?
Absolutely, absolutely. Often speaking with folks who are registered Democrats, they'll say, I hope you'll actually be able to try to accomplish something. Because under this administration of Biden, we had the promise of canceling student debt, right? We had several promises that have not manifested. And what we've experienced on the other side is a profit-hungry private industry that has been price gouging us at the gas tank and in the supermarkets. And working people love to blame the president for the rising inflation that happens across the country. And so the Democrats are not doing themselves any favor by sitting on their hands amidst such a national crisis, right? With the recent shooting in Uvalde, for instance, I think we need to see more aggressive action on the parts of Democrats nationally to be able to try to call out the people who are standing in between meaningful gun reform and folks that are beholden to the NRA lobby.
Okay, Mike, we have one more question for you from Aida Rodriguez. Aida, go ahead. Aida, you're muted.
I live in a loud neighborhood. Hi, I wanted to, you spoke about how people are jaded. I specifically tend to always throw my focus onto Black and brown communities since we seem to always come from the more marginalized and the more disadvantaged communities. I really would love for you to speak to the people who are watching right now who may not understand what a lot of this politics. They only know, I know with my abuelita, all she knew was Republican and Democrat. Something like progressive would scare her because she doesn't know that that is really rooted in the betterment of her situation and community. How do we speak to these people who don't necessarily aren't as savvy when it comes to politics?
So my district is 70% Latino, right? Mostly Chicano, but also Central American. I myself am Puerto Rican. I grew up in a Puerto Rican community, ya tu sabe. And so our communities aren't plugged into CNN and MSNBC, and that's to their benefit. So that's one of the best things within this community is they're not digesting this terrible junk food coming from the corporate media. They read many more articles and newspapers and watch TV that's international. So they get a different perspective on international questions, things like Palestine, questions about like nationalized healthcare. Some of them have witnessed nationalized healthcare in some of their home countries. So when you talk about the actual issues and the material interests, how are we supporting raising wages, lowering rents, providing affordable housing? That means something to people, right? You got to speak to people where it hurts. And today people are hurting in their pocketbooks. People are hurting in their pocketbooks, and it's because of corporate greed. And people understand that like black and white. And so neither Democrat nor Republican, if you're talking to someone who's from a working class background and in communities of color, if you're talking to them in their language, coming from where they're coming from, you'll be able to connect, all right? Now, if you come in social justice warrior, big progressive, flag across your back. That's kind of jarring to people in our community, right? I mean, folks in our community are not necessarily that outward when it comes to politics, but when you're talking real talk, that's when you're really gonna get into people's hearts and homes, right? And so I've been privileged and really happy that folks in this community have been very receptive. Our numbers just from the cursory field game that we did, less than 5% of people in this district are satisfied with the incumbent. And that's on us to be able to try to actually capitalize on, to actually show that people need to come before profits.
All right, Mike Ortega, a really strong candidate in California 46. Everybody, OrtegaForCongress.com. And remember, the polls have not closed yet. So if you're in the 46th district, rush out there in Orange County and make sure that you vote. Okay, thank you, Mike. Appreciate it, brother.
Thank you, good night.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.